Roman commanders, in an effort to train and toughen their troops, forced soldiers to run a lot, make long marches and carry heavy loads. The soldiers marched in full dressing, the weight of which was so great that, according to Plutarch, these soldiers were called Marium mules. The most detailed information about how the Roman military exercises took place, we find in the work of Wegesius, on military affairs, written at the end of the 4th or beginning of the 5th century. In writing this work, the author drew on many writings of his predecessors, from Cato the Elder to Tarentinus Paternus, which have not survived to our time. As if the first initiation to military training to recruits should be the teaching of the military step. The greatest care should be taken both during the march and in the battle formation that all soldiers keep the correct rows when moving. And this can only be achieved if through constant exercise, they will learn to move quickly and evenly. Always the greatest danger is exposed to the army divided and not holding strong rows. Wegesius further recommends marching in full dress. It is also necessary to strictly accustom young recruits to carry weights up to 60 pounds, walking in military step. To do this during difficult marches is made necessary by the necessity of carrying both food and arms. It is not to be thought that carrying this is difficult if skill is formed. There is nothing which constant preliminary exercise will not make very easy. According to the statutes approved by Augustus and confirmed by Hadrian, the military commanders were required to hold drills 3 times a month, during which infantrymen in full armor, with spears in their hands, were to walk 10 miles with military step and the same return to the camp, and some part of the way they should make a run. The endurance of Roman soldiers acquired as a result of training is admirable. Cornelius Tacitus tells how during the Civil War in 69, 6 Germanic legions Vitellius for a day to overcome 30 miles, and then the whole night was fighting. He also notes that the outcome of the battle would have been different if the soldiers had had the opportunity to eat, warm and rest before the battle. Military equipment. The most important part of a soldier's equipment was the weapons and armor that soldiers carried on their person. The soldiers immediately surrounding the warlord walked lightly, carrying only their weapons. At any moment, they had to be ready to repel a surprise attack from the enemy. The rest of the infantrymen carry spades and oblong shields, saws and baskets, shovels and axes, and in addition more belts, sickles, chains, and provisions for 3 days. Thus foot soldiers carry almost as much weight as pack animals. The list of these items alone, as well as the comparison of the soldiers loaded with them with loaded animals, testify to the weight of the load. To facilitate its carrying, Roman soldiers used a special device. Gaius Marius, to reduce the cartage, which most of all burdened the army, packed dishes and allowance of soldiers in bales, attaching them to a stick with a fork. So it was convenient and carry the burden and rest. Hence arose the saying, Mary's mules. How this device looked like, you can see on the reliefs of Trajan's column, on which the soldiers move in marching order, carrying their weapons, as well as a leather satchel with personal belongings, a bag with a supply of provisions, kitchen utensils and other things attached to a pole with a crossbar. A significant part of the soldiers' marching equipment were weapons and armor. Judging by the reliefs of Trajan's column and other images, the soldiers marched dressed in armor. They wore their helmet on the chest. For this purpose there was a special handle on the back of the helmet. The soldiers also carried a shield. It is most likely that it was thrown behind the back and worn on a leather belt thrown across the chest. It is possible, however, that the soldiers carried the shield with them only when they entered the enemy territory and began to strengthen the camp on a daily basis. Being within the Roman possessions, they could pack the shields on a mule or carry them on wagons, as shown on the reliefs of the column of Marcus Aurelius and the arch of Septimius Severus. Judging from the images, the soldiers carry only a pilum in their hands, tied to a stick with a crossbar on which hangs a satchel and a bag of provisions. The most important part of the Roman military diet was bread, which was given to soldiers mainly in the form of grain and only rarely in the form of breadcrumbs. The marching ration also included other foods, which were replenished from time to time. There are various indications in the sources about the amount of foodstuffs carried with them. Cicero writes about food for more than half a month. The author of the biography of Alexander Severus in the History of Augustus mentions that in the campaign against the Persians, the soldiers were supplied with food from warehouses in the places of rest, so they did not have to carry food supplies for 17 days, as it was usually done. About the same stock of food for 17 days, which had to carry a soldier during hostilities, reports Ammianus Marcellinus. Caesar writes that in the armies of his opponents in Spain, soldiers had with them a food reserve for 7 days. In addition to the military equipment and food supply, Roman soldiers may have had to carry some extra luggage on some occasions. Polybius tells how on one occasion soldiers had to carry stakes for a palisade on the orders of their commander. For a very long time, researchers have been trying to find out what weight had to carry the Mari mules. Extensive comparative data and experimental results were used for the corresponding calculations. The minimum, which carried a Roman legionary in the campaign, was 32 kilograms of clothing, weapons and military equipment, to which should be added 13 kilograms of marching luggage. In total, this amounts to 45 kilograms, to which should be added 4 kilograms of food rations. The tent, palisade for the palisade fence, hand millstones for grinding grain, and tools belonged to the whole unit rather than to individual soldiers, and were carried on pack mules. The mule could also carry part or all of the bread supply, which naturally reduced the weight of the personal equipment carried by the soldiers. Although the weight of the load seems excessive at first glance, it is believed that systematic training allowed the soldiers to cope with this load.